Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G's Story Time. We are reading Patricia St. Tells Her Own Story by Patricia St. With permission of 10 of Those Publishing Company, and we are on Chapter 21, The Grannies. Janet's father died soon after mine, and we both fetched our mothers to live with us. For some years they proved invaluable as prom pushers, babysitters, language teachers, and general odd jobbers. They made themselves available to other families as well as ours, and when Mrs. Radcliffe was taken seriously ill, 6-year-old Will tried to comfort her by saying, "It will be all right if you go to heaven, Mummy, because Granny St. will look after me." But the years took their toll, and Granny Thompson gradually became crippled with arthritis. Then Granny St. fell on the stairs and broke her ribs and never really recovered her strength or her memory. By the early 70s, they were both permanently bedridden and beginning to lose their memories. Yet for about 6 years, the bedroom they shared became a sort of sanctuary for all sorts of different people who loved to be there. Minnie shared in the nursing care, and Janet and I and Zora took nights in turn. Zora was Janet's home help. I wish I could tell you all of her story, but her disability makes her easily recognizable. Her first appearance many years before was quite dramatic. She was carried into outpatients by her 2 brothers. She sat down in front of the doctor and said, "I've come for my leg." Farnham, who was new in the hospital then, replied that he knew nothing about her leg. He listened sympathetically to her story. About 13 years previously, another doctor had amputated her gangrenous leg and told her parents to bring her back when she was fully grown, and he would fix her support. She was then 3. She was now 16. For 13 years she had waited in hope. It had been a difficult journey, and Farnham felt he could not disappoint her. She went to stay with Janet for a few days while the local carpenter constructed a wooden peg leg. She half hopped and was half carried home. She kept coming back and making herself more and more useful, and in the end it was arranged that she should stay. She became a cleaner, a cook, a child mender, nurse, and in many cases a teacher. At first her movements were greatly impeded by her disability. And then something happened. A friend of Hazel's, Olive Shaw from Lebanon, was sent home with cancer of the leg for an immediate amputation. She thought that this was probably the end, but was told to her joy that there was no signs of any secondaries, and that she could go back to her beloved school in Beirut, where she worked for another 2 years. She was fitted out with a beautiful, light-jointed metal leg and quickly learned to walk more or less normally. Olive wanted to give a thank offering to God for her recovery, and it was at this point that she had heard about Zora and her peg leg. She wrote for Zora's measurements and had a limb made which was a replica of her own. For some reason or other, Paul, Oliver, and Claire unpacked it. They brought it up to the front door with great ceremony while Zora screamed in amazement and delight in the kitchen. It was a great success. There was no activity she could not attempt. During her last years, she became a devoted, skillful nurse to the grannies. I have noticed that in old age and senility, the personality seems to crystallize. The basically self-centered becomes more so, and the loving, selfless become gentler and humbler in their weakness and easy to care for. Our grannies definitely belong to the second class. Granny Thompson was a strong, brave, loving woman who had been among the earliest women to qualify as doctors and had gone out as a medical missionary with the China Inland Mission. Her great claim to fame was that she had once sewn a half-severed head on again, and the victim had survived. It was a story the children never got tired of hearing. Although completely crippled and locked by arthritis, she never complained. Sometimes she liked to assert herself and stage a little small rebellion when she was presented with her daily bowl of bread and milk for breakfast. Granny Thompson grumbled and said, "I shall complain to the management. Can't you give me anything else?" "Of course, Granny. What would you like? Scrambled eggs?" Being toothless, the choice was small. "No. What about some porridge, Granny?" "No. Or some nice bread and butter? Salad?" The shrewd blue eyes twinkled, and then, "Bread and milk." She gave a little giggle and closed her eyes. The presence of God was very real in that quiet room where the 2 old saints rested and waited to go home. Bored, rich, elderly English ladies, tired of the constant round of cocktail parties and a small social set, began to be slightly afraid of the future, would come and read aloud to them. The grannies liked the gentle Christian books, but they could not concentrate for long. It was a common sight to see the reader plowing doggedly on while both grannies sat propped up, their mouths open, snoring gently. Something happened to me in that room, said a kind society lady after the grannies died. "I found a peace that I had not known before. I think I came to know God." Janet went back to England in 1974 to make a home for the 6 children, and the ensuing year was a dark one. Farnham developed typhoid fever very suddenly, and while he was still acutely ill, officials came up from the capital to say that the government was taking over the hospital, claiming the whole compound. All the buildings, including our own homes, were to be taken from us, and no compensation offered. We were given about 3 months to clear out, but there was one bright spot. They offered to employ all the Moroccan workers and expatriates who wanted to apply. There was anger and protest in the town, but nothing could be done. Farnham staggered back to the outpatients, and so many crowded in that the police had to come and control the hordes. At home, both Binti and my dear helper from those years in the mountains and said, the little boy staying with us, contracted typhoid. Isolation was almost impossible, because Said absolutely refused to stay in bed. Whenever I sat down, he appeared on the mat at my feet, burning and shivering with fever, but determined to stay put. The grannies dozed peacefully, and Zora worked night and day. Janet returned to help pack up the house and move me, Zora, and the grannies into the comfortable flat above the grocery shop in the native quarter, as both were far too frail and confused to face being transported to England. Then came the sad day when Farnham and Janet finally left Morocco, and the people cried in the streets. The grannies were simply laying there peacefully, waiting to go to heaven. They posed no problem in life, but I did dread the day of their death. For Christian death in Morocco is a complicated affair. The burial must take place the same day. The grave digger and the Anglican clergyman must be found, the British consul informed, weeping Moroccan friends entertained, and friends informed, and the services planned. Most of those close to me had left. This particular problem loomed very large in my mind. I seemed unable to trust that all would be well. Besides, a mother is a mother, and I dreaded the thought of her going, as well as the fear of not being able to cope. But I forgot that the mercy of the Lord is new every morning, and precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Hazel came to stay for a fortnight on her way from England back to Lebanon. There was no visible change in the condition of the grannies. My mother smiled sweetly and vaguely at Hazel. Perhaps she knew her, perhaps she didn't, but she always recognized and responded to love. It was very hot, and we were able to leave them both with Zora and spend a day together on the beach. Zora had done night duty, but she came in early the morning. Granny Sanjan was breathing so fast, she said. I gave her a penicillin shot, but there was nothing to be done. Hazel and I sat beside her, holding her hands. Apart from fast breathing, she was not in distress. At 9:30, she gave a little sigh and stopped breathing. She might simply have been fast asleep on that beautiful August morning, and we knew that she had passed over. That morning, Jesus stood on the shore. Because she was so deeply loved by the expatriate community, they made room for her in the beautiful little cemetery surrounding the Anglican church instead of in the large foreigner cemetery outside the town. Many came to the service, and throughout the sorrow and busyness of that day was the sense of amazement. I was not alone. God took her while Hazel was with me. Granny Thompson, whose bed had been surrounded by screens during the comings and goings, did not appear to notice that her old friend was no longer beside her. Locked in arthritis, she could not turn her head, and in the days following the funeral she seemed in particularly good form. When about a month later Janet wrote to say that the children were all back in school and college, and she was going out to look after her mother for a fortnight to give me a break, I wrote back telling her that Granny Thompson seemed so well and that we were all enjoying her. Janet arrived, and I went for a couple of days to rest at a retreat up in the mountains, the Cachet, a tiny house built mostly by Farnham and his friends and children on a piece of land left to him by a grateful patient. It was primitive, but so beautiful. In spring, one looked down on the mountainside in the golden cloud of mimosa blossom, and in the summer the coast lay blue and shimmering through the curtain of green. Many a happy family holidays and quiet retreats had been spent there, and I was enjoying the peace early in the morning of the second day when Janet arrived. I think you'd better come, she said. I think Granny Thompson is going to heaven. Granny Thompson was, as usual, quite definite about it. She had contracted pneumonia in the night, and her breathing was rapid, and penicillin, which had always averted this crisis before, was ineffective. But up she gazed at the end of the bed, and she told us that she could see her husband and the 3 boys waiting for her. Can you see the Lord Jesus, Granny? Asked Janet. "No, no," came the whispered reply. "That's not allowed yet." She lingered on for several days, and we took it in turns to sit beside her and sing the old hymn she loved best. She was dozing quietly at 2 a.m. one night when she suddenly simply stopped breathing. It was Janet's last day. Her flight was booked for the next morning, but she was there to help and make all the necessary funeral preparations. Granny Thompson was buried in the same grave as my mother at 5 o'clock that evening. It is just beside the entrance, and all who go into the church can read the inscription as they pass. "The beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety by him." There was a terrible sense of desolation as we cleared the beds away and made the room into a sitting room. Zora, who had lost her job and the main purpose of her life, wept and wept. I felt as though some great center of peace and stability had suddenly been swept away. There was so much still to do, and I felt so tired, after all the night nursing, to start again. Yet I had not been alone. Our times had been so wonderfully in His hands. Looking back over her life, nothing seemed more wonderful than God's timing. It was 2 or 3 weeks after Granny Thompson's death that the news came through. Clarendon had been burnt down. Our aunt, the former head, who lived retired in a flat on the premises, had been, and most unusually, away for the night. But her home and all her property had been destroyed. My brother John, a GP in Coventry, and his wife, a nurse, had taken her in. I think I knew then I would have to go home. John had fairly advanced Parkinson's disease and really needed help. 3 of the 7 children were still at school, and my sister-in-law had already taken in several elderly members of the family and nursed them one by one till they died. She could hardly be expected to start all over again. I said I would come over and see the situation at Christmas, but there was still Zora's future to be settled, and many, many other dear friends to visit and say goodbye to. Zora found a job with kind English people, and Granny Thompson, as an acknowledgment of years of loving, patient, devoted service, had left money in her will for Zora to buy her own little house in the native quarter of the town. But the money had not come through when she came to me and said she had found the ideal house if the money could be advanced, but the owner wanted cash immediately. Knowledgeable friends agreed that the house was all she wanted and the price surprisingly reasonable. Only the cash was lacking. It seemed as if nothing could be done, and I had to go out that morning, and I remembered walking down the street thinking, if I was Hudson Taylor or Amy Carmichael, I could ask for this money to fall from heaven. But I'm not like that. I could hardly expect him to do such a miracle for me. Then the verse of a hymn came clearly to my mind. O infinite Redeemer, I bring no other plea. Because thou dost invite me, I cast myself on thee. Not because of my worth or my unworthiness, the invitation is for all. Come unto me. The ground of our asking is simply Jesus. I told the Lord about the need and went home. When I arrived back, a printed envelope was lying on the table. It looked so dull that I did not even open it until after lunch. The Scripture Union had made a mistake, for which they apologized profusely later on. I had told them never to send my half-yearly royalties to Morocco, but to pay them into my bank in England. Some secretary had misunderstood and posted the check to me. The house was bought and later became a home for 4 young orphan nephews and nieces adopted by Zora. And she always testifies with bright face that God provides. I went home at Christmas to see the situation firsthand, but I think I knew then that it was time to go home. I went back to pack up and say goodbye. In a country where Christians stand together in a harsh, mocking world, with a continual threat of punishment, persecution, or expulsion hanging over them, the links that bind us grow very strong. How could one just say, keep in touch? Most of the older women had never learned to write. Not that they were abandoned. 2 or 3 of us would remain in secular jobs and would shepherd the little flock, but it was such a little flock. As the day drew near to leave, I struggled again with waves of depression and regret. With so little to show for it, what had the years really achieved? I wish I had really studied the life and writings of Lilias Trotter at that time, as I did later when I wrote her biography, Until the Day Breaks, published in 1990. It was during this period that Wendy Morniac came on a visit and gave me the material for the biography of her late husband, Dr. Kenneth Morniac, much loved as a doctor in Rwanda, and then working largely with students in London. We call the book Man of Two Worlds. And tomorrow we're going to be reading chapter 22, Lebanon. I love you. I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.